H.P. Lovecraft is undoubtedly one of the most influential horror writers ever. But what's so great about his work? Why he still occupies our minds till this day? And why you may have a wrong impression of his work if you haven't read it? I would like to talk about these things in this video. Although this video is not about the man himself but more about his legacy, I have to say something about him. He lived in the early 20th century, and in general his life was pretty tragic. His family struggled from declining financial state, and Lovecraft himself from a known mental illness. There are theories what it might have been, but no official medical records state the issue. In simple words, Lovecraft had regular mental breakdowns and depression, during which he hid from society. He died in 1937 from the cancer of the small intestine when he was 46 years old. The most controversial part of his life is that the man was racist. I don't want to dwell in this topic, but I have to acknowledge the fact. Lovecraft had publications of his work during his lifetime, but he was never really famous and always struggled financially. So how did he got so famous after death? You see, Lovecraft had many writer friends, who even had a name, Lovecraft Circle. These people basically carried on his legacy. This way his works became famous bit by bit, while famous writers and filmmakers such as Stephen King, John Carpenter and Guillermo del Toro have acknowledged Lovecraft's influence on them. To general society, Lovecraft got introduced through these creators, and now everybody knows him. So what did they see in his works? Let's start with the fact that Lovecraft created a whole myth around his stories. All stories have separate characters and plot, but they all revolve around the same Lovecraft world, which is full of ancient aliens and monsters who are hidden from humanity. But they most certainly are not dead and can come back any moment. There is a logic woven into this, because these ancient gods have their own hierarchy and wars between themselves. You can create a whole space opera around them, but this misses the point of Lovecraft vibe. His intentions are to create a mystery and horrific realization of the main character, that humanity is not alone and is most certainly not capable of defending itself against any of these dangers. So the one aspect of Lovecraft's genius is that he has a complete lore of his imaginary world, just like other famous works, such as Lord of the Rings, Witcher, Star Wars and others. The only difference is that this one is hidden a little better and is focused purely on cosmic horror. The second thing I would like to mention is that Lovecraft's stories feel very scientific. They focus heavily on describing how things are actually happening. The anatomy of monsters and scientific practices are described in these stories. This points back to the author himself, because Lovecraft was very interested in sciences. However, he didn't like math, and that prevented him from excelling in science. Especially interested he was in biology and astronomy, which translated into his work. Although this may be a turn off for somebody, and even I sometimes found him delving too deeply into this stuff, it makes the stories feel believable and alive. If they become believable, it carries more impact of the horror they bring. Of course, I have to mention that Lovecraft's stories are work of his time, and are not so relevant nowadays, but still, the reader can clearly see the idea and great attention to details. Also, I don't see this trait so often in artistic works, and this makes Lovecraft to stand out. Important thing of Lovecraft is that he himself created a whole new genre, cosmic horror, which is also very relevant today. Of course, glimpses of it exist in many works, but Lovecraft elevated meaning of it to the next level. So what is cosmic horror? It is a realization of fact that much more powerful forces than humanity exist in this world. Incomprehensible, immense processes are happening, and we are mere dust in the wind in their way. Of course, everyone who is just a bit interested in space, stars, planets and all this stuff understands it. But until we haven't made a real practical contact with these things, it is just a thought in the back of our heads. Lovecraft's characters usually are naive scientists, and they delve into the science too deeply. Because of their naivety, they research everything until the point where they become into a real contact with previously mentioned stuff. This is where the horror comes from. What would you do if you came into contact with ancient aliens whose ways you can't impact in any way, and they are about to destroy the Earth? There is a chance that you would simply go mad, and this is what Lovecraft's characters often deal with. This is the true meaning of cosmic horror, to get so knowledgeable that you go insane, because the knowledge of the existence is not comprehensible for simple human mind. But I think I talked enough about the meaning of Lovecraft's ideas. If it were simple philosophy, it wouldn't have become so popular, and I often see that people like to discuss just this philosophy. When you actually read Lovecraft, all this is in the background and you don't know anything about it. You become aware of these powers while stories go on. The stories themselves actually have completely practical problems. There are fights and there is action here, and also a deep mystery. If all the philosophy would have been explained from the start, it wouldn't be so interesting and scary. As I mentioned before, characters actually deal with completely practical problems when coming into contact with cosmic beings. And not all of these beings are godlike, they often are just aliens, undoubtedly much stronger than humans, but still. The stories also have a pretty determined start and a finish. The pacing is linear and reader is not constantly wondering what is real and what is not. The funny thing is that the character is actually the one wondering about this, but from the bystander's perspective everything is rather clear. This goes hand in hand to my initial point that Lovecraft has a scientific writing style, and this makes these stories actually more horrific because horror is real, not just an idea. Let's talk about settings of Lovecraft horror. Lovecraft likes to choose places which are remote to the human world. His monsters usually dwell in the ocean, mountains, and even Antarctica. Also popular place is some remote undeveloped village, forgotten to the outside world. Ocean and Antarctica setting makes his horror still relevant today, because these are pretty much unexplored places. More than 80% of the ocean is unexplored today. Remote village is also a classical horror setting. Places like these work very well in horror, and can basically be considered classics. Lovecraft also likes to include cults in his stories. These cults worship the ancient gods, aliens, and try to bring them back to life. I think that these features of Lovecraft horror makes it great, because these really are classical elements. When you read or listen about Lovecraft's works, you may find that all this is very doom-like, and there is no hope and all struggle against something like this is in vain. But not all of the actual Lovecraft stories are like this. You can still find hope there. You may ask why? Because all of the eternal doom almost never comes into life at the end. Usually main characters somehow deal with the problems on Earth with humans is still existing. From my perspective, Lovecraft is not God is dead type of a guy. He's more like, God is monster and it's sleeping, don't wake him up. Now let's talk about my last point why Lovecraft is a horror genius. The stories may have rather practical pacing, but mystery still prevails. The author somehow manages to combine these traits. This happens because the lore of the ancient gods and aliens are never fully explained. The characters come in contact with parts of it, but there is always something more to explore, more secrets to uncover, more horrors to face. The reader is always left wondering what else there could be, because characters are mere humans and their stories start and end, and they are never capable of exploring everything. Lovecraft gives us only a glimpse of the horrors waiting in space, not full myth. Reader can always wonder about it further. Also, Lovecraft uses rather modern ending in some of his stories, and it is a twist ending. It may not change the meaning of the story itself, but it includes some dark truth in the last sentence reader didn't wonder about before. You can foresee the twist, but in my opinion, it's because we are kinda trained to do it nowadays. The twists in Lovecraft's works are rather ahead of his time, and I love it. In conclusion, I would like to say that you should go and read Lovecraft yourself. The power of Lovecraft's lore is that it's never fully explained. There are many works in music, gaming, filmmaking, and literature which are directly influenced by Lovecraft's works, such as Metallic's song Call of Cthulhu, computer game Sinking City, and movie Color Out of Space. These are just some examples. While the man himself is long deceased, his legacy is as strong as ever. Maybe you will be the one continuing it. Thank you for watching.